Hi, Dr. Eesha. Welcome to Varta 2023, a dialogue series with industry experts and on digital safety for children. Thank you so much for joining. And just to give a brief introduction of Dr. Eesha, she's an assistant professor in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at NIMHANS in Bangalore. She also holds a PhD in psychiatry in the field of environmental determinants of adolescent temperament and also a postdoctoral fellowship in obsessive compulsive and related disorders. She's published several journals, her work in several journals, both national and international. And I think the list just goes on. I would just want that, Isha, it'll be great if you can actually share your professional journey and also tell us as to how come you chose this and why are you where you are today?
Thank you, Chitra, for that very generous introduction. Yes, so like you said, I am a psychiatrist by training, and I've done my psychiatry training at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, which is a one of its kind institute of national importance located in Bangalore. My journey in terms of working in the field of mental health, especially working in the field of child mental health, I think probably began let's say, I don't know, around 15 16 years ago, when I was still pursuing my undergraduation, that is MBBS, at the King George Medical University in Lucknow. For some reason, I had it pretty clear in my mind that if I'm going to be practicing medicine, mental health is what I want to do. Perhaps a large part of it was to do with, how modern medicine, even with all of its, advanced treatments of all kinds, does fall short of, that little bit when you ignore, the mental health or the social well-being, that accompany any and every distress that human beings have. So I think I was quite enamored by what medicine can do, but also more by where the physical aspects of medicine have a limitation in. And of course, if I'm going to help in mental health, then what can be more interesting than understanding children's and adolescents' mental health? So it was just something that I felt drawn to right from my undergrad days, and I decided to take up psychiatry for post-graduation. I think getting into NIMHANS was truly and amazingly lucky, because I could have done psychiatry anywhere, but then when you get through in NIMHANS, you don't want to miss that. And I think I was truly blessed to be part of this very, very rich and promising space in the practice of mental health. And yeah, I mean, the rest is just, I got into psychiatry and I knew I wanted to do child mental health, since many years before that. And so here I am.
Thank you so much, Isha, for that. I think also what will be interesting to know is you spoke a lot about the prestigious space which NIMHANS is, and which is actually one of the, absolute institutes of national importance. I think it'll also be good for, people like us to know what does a typical day for a assistant professor in the, Department of Psychiatry look like in NIMHANS.
Wow. We used to say this about neurosurgeons, and I think now we're saying this about child mental health experts as well, that your day begins before sunrise and ends after sunset, because we usually tend to have very long days because work is quite intense. But so, I mean, usually how, things are organized at NIMHANS is that all of us work as, part of smaller units of professionals where you have people from different fields working together. In mental health, we tend to combine at least, 3 or 4 fields for every single person that we see. So we bring in expertise from psychiatry, whether adult or child and adolescent, along with clinical psychology, as well as psychiatric social work, and sometimes also psychiatric nursing. So we try our best to work for every single person in these multidisciplinary groups, because we know that, especially as far as children and adolescents are concerned, mental health or mental ill health is most often the outcome of environmental experiences that children have. So in fact, a large amount of our time, a great proportion of our work, is actually not to do with children with primary psychiatric illnesses, but it is actually to do with emotional distress, arising out of family-related or larger society-related problems, distress arising out of children in conflict with the law, distress in children whose families are in one or the other, psychosocial struggle or legal struggles. So there is a lot of environmental contribution. And so that cannot be addressed if you're only looking at it from a medical standpoint at all. So, our typical day is working in these multidisciplinary groups, whether it is in the outpatient or the inpatient, and, dividing our time there. Along with that, at NIMHANS, we also have, a very, very vested interest in conducting research, both, again, from a clinical standpoint, assessments of young people's mental health, state-of-the-art interventions for young people's mental health, developing newer and newer technologies, both in terms of psychotherapies, pharmacotherapies, etc., to see how, people can be assisted well. Of course, besides the academic training, teaching, community engagement that, we very often have, such as with organizations like yourself, where, because this is, what one of my teachers very often says, that the landscape of child mental health is well beyond the doors of the clinic. And that's what we try to be in our day-to-day work, as holistic and as outreach as possible.
No, that's I don't know if I should say exciting, but definitely lots of insights on, exactly what really goes around and the amount of effort that goes with the work that you do with children, Isha. I just, a question that I have for you is, over the last few years, I'm sure the evolution of the type of cases that are coming in terms of mental health issues with children is changing with the rampant increase of access to internet for children. Are you experiencing that at NIMHANS? And if you are, how are these cases evolving? And if you could just give some examples, definitely keeping in mind all the ethical considerations.
Absolutely, Chitra. And in fact, we have been, recently discussing with some of our, previous teachers and, faculty who have now retired from the institute about, actually this very issue, that with the increasing digitalization in our lives, it's almost like there is an extended space, because now it's not just the school and the home and, the park that the child visits, or, the tuition teacher who comes in. So these are all very tangible spaces that children find themselves in. And, these spaces are accessible. You can see them, you can feel them, you can truly know as a parent or as a professional, what is really going on there. But once, children have this, and, might I say that children do have an increasingly early access to the digital space. So once they, have this very early access to the digital space, which is endless, and which is not something that me or you or, anybody working with children can really truly understand, what the extent and length and breadth of that space is. So the trouble is that neither the children nor their parents nor professionals who engage with them really understand the entirety of that space. And I think that is what, lends itself to a lot of speculation, a lot of confusion, and a lot of, not knowing how, to really engage children better. The other thing is that while on the one hand, there is this unknown space, on the other hand, and probably, this is coming from people who do know and understand that space, there is a tremendous, and might I say, a very advanced way of keeping that space so engaging and so intuitive that once somebody finds themselves in that space, there's no end to that engagement. So most human contact and, social relationships have a particular definition or a particular quality to them, so they have a certain confinement, within which an individual operates. But the digital space doesn't seem to, at least now, have that kind of confinement. It's an unconfined space, so it's an endless, limitless space in that sense. So I think the trouble is that generations before the current generation have not really understood the entirety of that space, and now you have this entire new generation who've grown up with it from the time that they were 1 and 2 and 3 years old. And how did they grow up with it? It was just given to them. So whereas school and hospital and park and everything is where parents socially slowly introduce their children to, and get them to understand it, set some rules, set some boundaries, so a particular socialization process happens. But in the digital space, most often what we find is that it's just given to this young child, or the young child just picks it up, picks up the parent's phone or the brother's phone, or suddenly when they're 8, the parents decide that, okay, you can have your own phone now, you're old enough. But and that's the trouble, that the socialization process or the norms that we apply to every other space children occupy are not applied to the digital space. So what do we have? We have an entire generation, it's like you've taken them to another planet and just let them discover for themselves what's happening, because you yourself don't know what's happening there. So I think why I'm going on and on about this is because this this sense of not knowing what I'm really getting into is where the risks come from. Because then how do you moderate a young person's interaction in this space? Like you were saying, you were talking about this gaming expert a while back. If I'm working with a young person who has a gaming related addiction or some other problem, for me to work with them in that space, I need to know that space. Right. Otherwise, how do I guide their mental health and social well-being in that space until I myself am completely familiar with it? So I think the risks are more about what we don't know and how children are socialized into these spaces.
No, I think just to summarize what you're saying, I think it's more about endless complexities in an endless space without a strategy to socialize, which is like extremely scary, honestly. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So I think I'll come to the point of how we should do that later during this discussion. But I think what I want to ask you, Eesha, is that I don't know if it's like it's a euphemism, or sometimes it's just too much to talk about. But then there is no layman understanding to what are, first of all, are there any mental health consequences to internet and access to internet, or overusage? And that's what I want to say. It's not about access to internet that causes all this, but it's overuse, uncontrolled use, unknown use. Is there a mental health consequence, and what are these mental health consequences? So just to really explain it in a way that most of the laymen around and people like us can really understand what this means.
So, early on, interest came, into this entire space in terms of, identifying mental health problems, identifying, real morbidity related to the space in the form of what we call, so there are certain behaviors which operate just like drugs do. So we know that there are a number of drugs like alcohol, cocaine, cannabis, and so on, which have the potential to make a person addicted to them. And what does addiction mean? Addiction basically means that you value something so much more than everything else in your life, that it has the topmost salience. You experience a sense of loss of control when you're with that substance, so that once a person starts consuming alcohol, for example, they just don't know when to stop. You also develop tolerance, which is that earlier you could take only 1 drink or 2 drinks, but then as you become more and more addicted, you just have no limit, and you can consume like 10 to 20 drinks at a time without your brain feeling the same kind of effect. And anytime that substance is taken away from you, there is an intense amount of craving, and you even experience withdrawal effects. So just like substances can have this kind of an effect on the brain, that they can make the brain addicted or dependent on them, in the same way certain behaviors can also get a person addicted. And the internet use, so whether it is gaming, so there is this disorder called the internet gaming disorder, which appears in some of our classificatory systems, or what we more commonly call as behavioral addictions. So it may not necessarily be to do with gaming itself, but it could be a behavioral addiction to do with social media use. It could be a behavioral addiction to do with watching videos online or watching any other online content. So I think behavioral addiction is something that we more commonly see as a well-defined disorder in the space, where a young person feels absolute loss of control, and they experience an immense amount of distress the moment the gadget or the internet is taken away from them. Other than that, of course, there are mental health consequences which probably have more to do with what a person is interacting with. So for instance, there can be cyberbullying. And there is a large amount of literature among young people how the dynamics of cyberbullying are very different from bullying in the real social space. In the real social space, a bully is somebody who is famous, who is probably stronger looking, and has a following, and so is a powerful person. So there is that very obvious power differential when bullying occurs in school or more commonly experienced social spaces. But in the online space, the power differential is not necessary, because your power is defined by anonymity. And when you're anonymous, for somebody struggling with other kinds of issues, anonymity can give a very, very deviant, manipulative form of power. And that can become so tormenting and traumatizing for the person at the receiving end of the bullying. So cyberbullying is, and of course that can then secondarily lead to depression or anxiety and all kinds of mental health consequences. Other than that, there can be a whole lot of developmental impact on young people, because especially during adolescence, that's where your identity is really shaping up. So your self-understanding, what your self-esteem rests upon, your feeling of self-efficacy, self-confidence, all of that really comes from how yourself and your identity are developing. Now, because young people are all the time on social media, self-identity really starts resting upon what they see on social media and how they identify to it.
Yes.
So I'm okay because 10 other people on social media say this is how I should be.
The whole explanation around looking at it from an addiction as a behavior that is causing distress and wanting to go back to it again and again, not being able to stop, versus the developmental impact you mentioned. It's more about the digital identity that anybody is worried about today as children, rather than actually their own identity as just individuals where they are, because everything is about digital, and all of that causing to depression, anxiety, stresses. I think this is really summing up quite a lot of mental health issues that you're talking about. Would be great if you can share a couple of examples of cases that you have, which we could identify with.
The pandemic and what that did to children's engagement with the digital space, also had a heavy impact on the mental health consequences. It probably accelerated it, because some of the normalizing effects of social spaces, of school, of family were probably put on hold because of the pandemic and the lockdown. So in the absence of the normalization, and you have an excess of digital exposure, and then that just accelerated the whole thing. So I mean, we've very often seen young children who probably growing up had difficulties with attention, focus, learning, in spite of having an age appropriate intelligence. So they were intelligent enough for their age, probably smarter in terms of their general intellectual capacity, but despite that they had learning problems, as happens with children who have stuff that's commonly called dyslexia, right? That spectrum of problem. So young children, developmental problems, cannot perform well in school, find that they are not good enough as compared to their peers. Teachers may be giving some critical comments. Parents may not have understood what the trouble of my child is. So an unaddressed developmental problem, and then the child finds the digital space and finds that because they're intelligent, so they're able to engage with that space really well. And that's a space that doesn't call upon learning ability. It doesn't call upon attention and focus because it is intuitive enough to self-engage, so the space itself makes the attention available, right? So these kids who were vulnerable, who were at risk because of their developmental difficulties, find the digital space, and then there is an increasing, unending engagement because nothing else was actually working. And this is the one thing that's working. So, how the digital space complicated, what was otherwise a developmental vulnerability and presented to us as a behavioral addiction. And then how do you work back with this kid to say, this is probably maladaptive coping, and, we need to go back to identify stuff to make you stronger, to make you more, capable of facing other situations in life, and, how we need to balance how much time you spend on the digital space. There are other, instances where we have had kids, an adolescent, let's say, so slightly grown up kid, maybe 13, 14, 15 years old, who, was okay, was fine. And then, started, spending time on social media and everything, developed depression, which may or may not have been related to anything to do with the internet. But what disorders like depression and anxiety do in young people is that they do instill some kind of a need for isolation and withdrawal from, their social circle and all of that. And then now if these young people have a gadget, or, a lot of kids these days have their personal phones, and then the engagement on social media, and because their mood state is depressed or they're anxious, there is a tendency to try and explore material, try and explore, platforms that cater to that mind state. And, not every parent, not every young person knows what they should be using the phone like, so the phone can be set up as a child's phone, that there can be sites that can be blocked, there can be parental control. So for the large majority of our population, I think, that kind of stuff people are not aware of. So when these young people who have any other illness engage in a space, and start looking up for material that probably doesn't help that space, then that, adds another layer of difficulty in working with them. So I think the large majority of kids that we see, most of the time, actually, at least, at our center, we don't see primary behavioral addictions as such. What we see is young people having gone into the digital space and using it excessively because of other underlying vulnerabilities, whether these were developmental or they were to do with, depression, anxiety, and other emotional problems.
That makes sense. Having said that, I think just to follow up on this question on the evolution or the changing types of cases that are coming, I think the word digital addiction is used pretty much in a common parlance now. Like, the way we have been using depression, we've been using anxiety disorder. But is there like a really clinical term called digital addiction? And if so, how can parents identify that, like, in a very simple way? If they have to identify, okay, my child is getting addicted, what are those like top 5 or 6 things that they should look out for?
So yeah, I mean, clinically we call it behavioral addictions more commonly, because it is understood that any behavior that a person gets addicted to has similar psychological dynamics. So the stuff that I spoke about a little while back operate commonly across different behaviors, and which are basically, and this is what parents should also look for. So the most clinching thing is if there is a sense of loss of control, which means that my child is using, let's say, for example, the mobile phone, and finds it very, very hard to stop. The child will say, okay, just give me half an hour more, just give me 15 minutes more, and I'm just keeping it down, just keeping it down. So that inability to actually stop yourself from at a point, or, when it is clearly gone a little overboard or something. So that sense of loss of control is at the center of a lot of addictive disorders, including behavioral addictions. The other thing that we're looking for is, I mean, of course, like you said, that at what point should parents say that this is a problem? So probably by that point, the child has actually increased their amount of use, the hours of use per day to, quite a bit. And this is the process, what we call tolerance. So tolerance means that earlier, my kid would be able to put it down after half an hour. But now, it takes almost 4 to 5 hours for them to actually, feel okay. Now I have used it enough. So increasing number of hours, inability to stop, doing this at the cost of every other engagement, including stuff that the child may have earlier enjoyed. Uh, and an intense amount of craving. So if you take away the gadget, if you take away the internet or, whatever digital space, the child finds it very, very hard. The craving and the distress associated with staying away from the gadget is quite high and unmanageable. So those are the things that, parents need to look for.
That's extremely useful, Eesha. Just following up on this, I think somewhere you did speak about there's a basic intelligentsia. Despite that, there are certain disorders that happen. But at the same time, my question is that, a lot of parents are struggling to, figure out whether it's a regular teenage issue that I'm dealing with versus whether it's really an addiction or behavioral issues that I'm dealing with. So how do you really, at least for teenagers, is very specific for teenagers, how do you, I mean, of course, I also feel that it's inseparable given everything together these days, but still, how do you identify or separate this to really understand as a parent some basic things in managing and working with your children?
Yeah, I think that's, especially with teenagers, and especially because I think the norms of teenage years keep changing generation after generation. We've had kids who've turned around and said, but how would my parents know? They didn't have this.
Yeah.
Or, they don't understand the space. And I can't disagree with them.
Yeah.
You can't say it's a non-issue. So I think, as clinicians, what we're really looking for is what we call personal, social, occupational dysfunction. And what that means is that at a personal level, do we find that this young person is thinking, is, making decisions based on, a logical flow of thoughts? Do they seem to really understand what the consequences and, what the pros and cons of any given behavior are? So if at a personal level, in terms of their day-to-day functioning, what they expect themselves to do from morning till night, and we very often ask young people this, that, what do you really want to do from morning till night? And they will tell us that, this is what I should be doing. But are you doing it? No, I'm not. So is there a problem? There probably is. Right? So what my personal life should be like, not just from my parents' point of view, but also from my point of view. So children are able to tell that because like you're saying, because the basic intelligence is preserved, a lot of them know, the difference between functionality and dysfunctionality. So the personal space, the social space. Now, what are we looking for? We're looking for that after the onset of a particular behavior or after the onset of a particular change in the child's repertoire of behaviors, has there been a change in how they engage socially? Have they become much more withdrawn? Have they actually become overtly social? Because that can also happen. So my child used to be very quiet, but ever since they've started going on social media, suddenly I find that, there are so many children and he or she doesn't know now what to do with all these people. Right? So if there is a change in the social, circle, which again is not well thought out of, the child is not able to engage with it well enough or conducively enough. And lastly, occupational dysfunction, which means stuff like academic decline, not going to school, refusing to go there. Or if it is an older person, then we're looking at, that after school now there's just a break. They're not really able to figure out, what to do further and all. So as a mental health professional, I look for dysfunction when I have to try and identify, is this just a teenage issue or is it, a diagnosable condition that needs, proper therapy, intervention, etc. So that's my big clincher.
No, that makes absolute sense. Another question is, of course, this is related to quite a lot of stuff that we've spoken, but then we do have a diversity in terms of the country we are. There is an urban set of parents, there are rural parents, there are parents who are very informed versus parents who are not informed. But one thing that sets everybody together is the fact that access is still there in some or the other form. So what are some of the, basic things? I mean, of course, you've said that, but I think I don't mind you repeating it again if you have to, because this is extremely important. What are those, some of the key things that parents can do with children across socioeconomic, levels and stuff to just make sure that there's the right usage of internet that's happening with children.
Again, takes me back to something that I don't think will go out of fashion no matter which generation we're addressing. This thing called the culture of conversation.
Right.
So right from a very young age, when you give a digital device to a child without being involved in it, you are, opening up a lot of spaces and things that the child can explore without the opportunity to actually guide the young person through that space.
Yeah.
So I think it is critical for parents to be involved in their child's digital world, just like they are involved in the school, they are involved in the park that the child goes to, they are involved in who the child's friends are, they are involved with which adults come in contact with the child, right? So I think this idea of spaces that children occupy, so the digital world is a space. And for parents to really, internalize that fact and say that, my child's brain, it's a psychological space, isn't it? My child's brain is entering the space that I need to be a part of. So from very young age onwards, the parents should be heavily invested in and must know what is this child doing online, and what is the content that my kid is accessing. So in fact, so many times we tell parents that, okay, because these days there are nuclear families, it is tiresome for parents to be all the time trying to physically engage parents, and we know that the digital world is here to stay. So telling them that, you just keep away the laptop and iPad and everything, it's honestly not a practical solution. So we tell parents, okay, if you have to watch, you watch together. You play, you see along with your child what's happening, so that it creates an opportunity for you and your child to do something fun. You know what your child is seeing, and your child is probably going to start mimicking and mirroring a lot of the stuff that they see online, and you will know where it's coming from. Right. So from all of those perspectives, it's important to be involved. For slightly older kids, where by the time a kid is 10, 11, 12, they start having their privacy and autonomy battles, and you can't see everything I am seeing. But if from the very start, there is a certain openness in the parent-child relationship, and the child, and once the parent is open and involved, the child also understands that where they're coming from, versus a 13-year-old whose parents suddenly decide from now you must tell me what's happening, because then that relationship was never formed in that open and conversational way. So building that in right from the start, and even if it wasn't built from the start, having a conversation with an older child and saying, these are my concerns and what can we do, about making sure you're not getting into trouble. Can we do this? Can we do this? So it may have to begin on a different platform with an older kid, but the idea of the culture of conversations remains the same, and then that's the relationship that parents need to have, to really know what is the digital space their child is occupying.
No, absolutely. So much emphasis, I think, should be given to this culture of conversation. And I think, like you said, involvement is important. And when we were talking, I was like, involvement happens when you come with that knowledge, and otherwise it's just intrusion for these children. And then it's like a back and forth. So I think, no, this makes a lot of sense, Eesha. The other thing that I wanted to ask you was, even in the work that we do, and also training programs that we do, and the work that we've done with you as well, one thing that we keep talking about is safe spaces. Create safe spaces for conversation. Just again, very layman, how do you create that safe space, and what is that safe space that children can access?
I think a safe space, well, I mean, I don't have to quote myself. There's this famous person that we love referring to in our work by the name Lev Vygotsky. And he spoke about this entire concept of zone of proximal development. What that means is that, now this young person is born with a certain potential to grow. Now, when we are young, and, as children grow, there are different stages of development. So the first year and a half, you're basically invested in physical development.
Right.
Then, comes speech and language. And then comes social emotional development. So now till the time, physical development is happening or social emotional development is happening, the parents are there all the time. They are encouraging the child. So they will massage the child, they will, play a lot with the child will be encouraged to, jump here, climb there, push that, pull this. So a lot of physical opportunity is given. So that is the safe space then. So the space is safe because the parent is present. It is safe because the child will not be physically injured. And it is also safe because the child's developmental potential is being maximized. Now, when you come, to your toddler age, that's when speech and language are really taking shape. So what do parents do? They encourage the child to speak, and the child is most of the time talking jargon, but you love it, and you don't want it to stop. So the safety there comes from, again, parents are there, they know who the child is with, and they're allowing the child maximum developmental space.
Right.
Now, the trouble happens, as soon as the child has got language, has got the physical capacity, now social emotional development is peaking, during your preteen and early teen phase. Now, that's the time where safety actually becomes a risk. Because, if parents become overtly controlling or overtly non-controlling, where the child is allowed to do anything at all, that's where the space becomes unsafe. So absence of adult supervision during that time, absence of adequate opportunities to grow. So children will grow through interacting with others, through engaging with their friends and with adults and with other people around them. So I think the idea of a safe space is centered upon A, supervision and monitoring, but B, also maximizing children's developmental potential. It's high time that we stop interpreting safe spaces very literally. Because people tend to, a safe space means, nigrani rakhna. Yeah, somebody should just be there, to watch the child, or children should not be allowed to go out and play. Children should not be allowed to meet anyone, or, this tendency to hyper sanitize the environment. So the school also, something goes wrong and the immediate reaction is, cut and release that, we cannot have this in our school. But that idea of sanitizing spaces is not okay.
Right.
Because the more that you bring in no adversity or no, negative experiences for a child, you're actually counterintuitively decreasing safety, because this child has then not learned how to face with it. So it's about holding a child's hand through every experience that they have and making sure you're in the know of what the child is experiencing and then walking them through it. So the idea of safety needs to be centered around maximizing developmental potential.
No, that's makes a lot of sense, because I think safety, like you said, is just visualized or thought as something that where you're not causing an injury, but not allowing the developmental prioritization that you're really talking about. No, that's super insightful. Just have a couple of more final questions for you, and I think one is, how can we increase children's access to real-time or effective counseling services with the fact that you are working with NIMHANS, and I know that there are different other services, but there might be times, because what we also seeing from some of our researchers is that children prefer to take action on their own. Many a times they don't want to reach out to adults or trusted adults or even peers. Many a times peers still they're ready to go to, but not anybody else. But if there is a need for a child who is able to recognize that I need counseling, I need support with my mental health issues when it comes to digital spaces, how easily can it be accessed, and how real is it in terms of accessing that we have right now?
What we have found works is informing children that it is okay to talk, because not every child is okay with a similar access. So one child may be okay talking to a teacher, the other child may be okay talking to a parent, the third child, like you're saying, may want to seek help independently. So because children can vary in what their comfort zone is in terms of seeking help. So I think the first step to that answer is to very, very emphatically, for responsible adults to tell children that if you're experiencing distress, if you're not sure about what you're doing online, or if, there is any other trouble, it is absolutely okay to say it, because children before you have said it, children with you are, being open about these things. And this is something that kids need to do. And the second is, so, what one of the exercises that we do as part of this particular endeavor is, we tell each child that, in this one particular session, think of your safe person, or think of, where you want to go when trouble happens. Because what happens is, in that, state of anxiety and despair, when a child is in a problem, it may not instantly come, because thinking may be clouded and they are troubled and distressed and whatever. So A, telling children it's okay to talk, and B, beforehand getting them to think about what their comfort and safety zone is going to be, right? Now, if there is a child who particularly wants, to seek help outside of the family or school reach or whatever, I think currently the child line, or, the national helpline is where a lot of these services can actually materialize, because they are able to put children in touch with, whichever is the closest child welfare committee, or, somebody else that the child will want to speak to. But having said that, as and when, mental health support does start for this child, every mental health professional must take it as their responsibility to engage the family. Right. We're not very much in favor of children being engaged as individuals, because at the end of the day, you have to make this individual feel okay with the space they're going to go back to. So active engagement of the family and, everybody else in the significant others in the child's life is an absolute must.
That makes a lot of sense, Isha. I think one thing I just wanted to summarize with something that I have heard you at many places, and with the conversations that we've had, and I've always gone back and when have had a chance to speak to parents have said this, which has always come from you, is that, and it stayed with me, that, we teach our children how to cross a road. You look at the right, you look at left, and then you cross a road, but we don't really teach children, how to cross the road in the digital world. And I think that's left one pertinent question, is that how young is young to speak about digital risks to children? And I think that's a question, again, that a lot of parents ponder over, because they say that the moment you talk about risk, then they're more curious. But then if you don't talk about risks, then that's not real world. So how young is young when we should talk about this?
Yeah, that's interesting, because you were talking about this idea of maternity hospitals and pediatricians having to teach parents. I mean, that the thought that I instantly had at that time is actually the child's, I think the moment they're born, they're on the digital space, isn't it? I mean, so many times, post what's the first thing that you do? You go to your social media account. I mean, it sounds funny when you think of it like that, but then I think that is reality. I mean, that's what's happening around us. See, again, I want to draw a parallel to, crossing the road. So crossing the road, when do you teach? Probably when the child learns to walk, isn't it? So the moment your child starts walking, and that is how old? That's 1.5 for most kids, when they begin to, start wanting to run and walk and everything by themselves. So, and even at that age, it's not that you're not talking about risks. I mean, don't you tell your children, don't touch sharp objects? You use some colloquial term for it and say that, no, that's danger, or that's scary. We don't touch that. Or, similarly so we are already talking about physical safety. We're already talking about social safety, because we're saying, no, only come with mama, or only come with with the daddy. Don't go with, stranger. No, we don't take sweets from. So you're anyway talking about risk and safety in other contexts. So I don't see this big deal, that is made out of, you'll start telling children about risks, and then that is what they want to do. Actually, it'll be the other way around. I mean, when you tell a child this is sharp, how many times does the child go back and touch a sharp object? So they actually respond to, that there is an object, and then mama's, telling this very, very loudly and clearly, no, don't touch that, or, that's not okay. And children will perceive that. And they will actually not touch it, because they get that link. And that's what children need to start learning. So my answer to, the question of how young would be, when was the first time that, your child starts noticing the phone, or, starts asking for what is it and can I play it? I think that's the age you start. So if that age is for a child 2.5, then, and, you would obviously do it in, what
Yeah.
your child knows at 2.5. So you're going to do it according to that. Maybe at 2.5, all they want to do is flip it around. So you start telling them that, or maybe younger, probably at 2.5, they're probably already watching it. But maybe when they're 1 year, 3 months, they're just flipping it around. So you say, no, 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 we don't do that. And that we do tell, nobody wants their phone broken. And then maybe when they go on to, and then we say that, okay, we don't keep it on for so long. After some time, we turn it off. Then when they're watching content, we say, no, we only watch these things. We don't watch that. So, it happens in an age appropriate manner from the very first instances, just like you do for other aspects of safety and risk.
Thank you so much, Eesha. I think that's absolutely beautiful. And I think I would just sum up to say that, like you said, it's as young as you start looking at a phone. We need to be responsible enough to socialize children in the digital world. And I think one more point that I really, think of is really defining those safe spaces and being able to let them learn by themselves and explore what they have to, but do it with just holding their hands and not walking ahead of them. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much, Eesha, for this amazing interaction, and it's always lovely to speak to you. And I'm sure the session would really help a lot of parents out there and children as well, and caregivers, on how to really take care of the digital space and make it more safer for every single child. Thank you so much, Eesha, for your time.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.